The straight edge of the Yojimbo is good for shaving. Compare the paramilitary 2, where you have to kind of dig into your skin with the belly of the paramilitary, you know, to try to grab more hairs. The straight edge, like Mr. Reed was always saying on the Sabenza, he likes that straight edge for shaving. So yeah, definitely this one's basically a razor blade. Okay, here's the medium ceramic. Let's see. You know the way to show this? Look at that. And that is with a very toothy. It's only at medium diamond. You can see that coarse edge. You see it? Nothing pretty here. Look at that. Yet it's able to shave hair and cut phone book. Yes. It almost went further deep in. Like, dang it. Well, let's see. Newspaper. And, phone book. You know, I was just thinking about all these knife makers, and they were telling me how they like toothy. And I'm like, man, so I thought, you know, I had to fix, you see over here on towards the, here I had to remove a little notch so that I could sharpen it. And even then, like, it's still work in progress. You see the line. I can't get it over here, and it kind of arched up a little bit too much over here, and it dips down over here. You know, I don't care for the mirror polish if this works. So like I said, this is leaving it really toothy, right? I'm thinking what to pack in my backpack. This is me packing less, just medium diamond and medium ceramic. You know, a diamond can reprofile, and that's what I was doing here. I was trying to reprofile this, because if you give me 1 second, see here it's very high. You see that tapers down. Like where does that spire go? You know, like, see it? Gets the bevel, the cutting edge actually gets more shallow here. So what I was trying to do, I'm trying to first even it up. A slight micro bevel on a medium ceramic. Yeah, buddy. My initial impressions of the Yojimbo 2 were kind of not the best. Just different aspects that made me feel that the marketing behind it, especially it being marketed as a tactical knife, it was not designed that well. Now, after some use, a person may not like the shape, a person may not like this type of lock, but when you just talk about pure function, it boils down to what the blade is. What can the blade do? If it's a convenient blade to use, you're going to use the knife. If it's nonsense, you know, it's just going to sit there. Another YouTuber here, he asked me what would be my perfect blade, tactical knife design, for example. And if I had the choice of a steel, a blade with a traditional ferrous metal, an iron steel, and was a sub size like this, I would go for Warncliffe. I've done a couple videos now comparing it to the Paramilitary 2. and I'm going to recap, but definitely this blade shape in my opinion is superior to a paramilitary 2, especially at the size of a paramilitary 2. This outperforms it. Bob Trezula and his idea of also using a Wharncliffe, slightly modified because people think the curve is, it's just more mainstream. People are going to like a slight curve, a slight belly. It's not really relevant. Here, when we look at this blade size, we're looking at basically hollow ground, 4mm, and it's a Wharncliffe. And it's a tactical blade shape that Trezula obviously uses and knows, and Mr. Yannick's also knows. This blade shape has a very good tactical ability and also general utility. When I asked Mr. Trezula why he uses the Wharncliffe, he said it was because it was utility. It is. I mean, simple stuff as just getting underneath a cord or a piece of tape to slice underneath. That's true. You have people don't understand this, but a Wharncliffe is more pointy than a normal knife because the blade gets thinner as it goes down towards the actual edge. So if a tip goes down towards the edge, it's going to get sharper, more to a point. So Wharncliffes pierce very, very well. Now the main thing is, how does a Wharncliffe cut into material? I'm gonna reference quite a few videos when I did my testing with the Fox Deimos. And then also I did a recent comparison showing the edge angle of this knife compared to the Trezula, which is the same blade shape, but here is a much more obtuse edge angle. So if you guys have followed those videos, then you'll know what I'm talking about, and I'll try to do my best to recap it. The main idea is this: a Wharncliffe, okay, tactically speaking, if you guys watch my old videos on best tactical knife features, it puts the point further towards what you're cutting. So for example, if this was the opponent, for example, and I swing my hand, okay, I reach it sooner than, of course, if it was upswept. Okay, that just makes sense. I don't have to make as large movements. Okay, but what it actually does, though, is here. Now, if you guys understand, tactical knives can either be in karambit shapes, where there's like a hawk shape, right, or a recurve, and you guys recognize what recurve is, I'm pretty sure. Recurve blade. But the concept of both those knives is to kind of hook the material into that blade, to kind of like grab it like a claw. Okay, when you have knives like this, with an upswept blade, like a paramilitary, for example, okay, when you cut into something, what happens is, if you watch my Deimos vid, if you ever like taken one of your knives and hacked at a tree limb that was kind of loose, that tree limb may push away from the material you're cutting. As you hit it, there's some give, and I'm going to use a sponge to kind of represent this idea. As you cut at this surface, the material that's pushing down on doesn't catch. You see, the material can push back. You can see how it affects it. Okay, and as this blade then hits this material, it'll start to slice. It'll start to cut into it. But what it'll do is it'll push that material kind of away, so you don't necessarily grab anything. You see, if you understand this concept. Okay, here I am, I swing at this, and that's how it does it. Kind of pushes it away. On the flip side, this knife, when it hits it, it grabs all the material with it. It takes it straight down into the blade. Like it doesn't go away from you. Especially if for example, you hit it at this angle, it drags everything with it. All the material binds up, and basically the blade is forced to basically cut through. Now, if you guys understand that, if you guys try it yourself, you have to test it, watch my Deimos vid, but that's the whole idea. A karambit hooks that flesh, because when you have a shape like this that's upswept, it'll skim off. If you ever try and you hit something, your knife won't bind on what you're hitting, it'll slice what you're hitting. And of course, as it slices through, it'll dig in and cut deeper as it literally draw cuts onto whatever you're hitting. But you can see it has a tendency to run off and push the surface away. Okay, it's putting pressure into it. You can see it's not like this where it just hooks it. Now, which one's better? Well, this Warren Thomas knife here is a high edge angle, because titanium, the HRC, is kind of soft. Right now this is at like a 25-degree angle. The wood cutting performance is not so good, meaning the push cutting performance isn't so good either, basically. Now why? Well, okay, obviously because titanium is not able to perhaps hold a very shallow edge, although I'm still testing that. I think I can take this more shallow. But if it was a larger blade, then perhaps like a scimitar or something very large, then I would want an upswept blade, because if I hit something, it's fine because I have a long edge and I want this knife to slice all along that edge, and it's going to be a larger knife, so it might have an impact. So I want this edge angle to be higher, and so this edge angle is going to be fat, a thick edge angle. When I hit it, it's not going to perhaps push cut and deep into it and quickly go through all the material. It's going to meet some resistance, and it's going to need to skim across that surface. So for a larger knife, a curved belly makes sense, especially one with a more higher edge angle, whether it be because it's meant for some kind of impact cutting, or if it's meant for a steel or a metal such as titanium that is not as can hold a razor edge. Now, if I had to choose between the Wharncliffe and a upswept belly in a tactical situation, a Wharncliffe would be my preferred if it is sort of a general real life flesh to flesh kind of fight. A Wharncliffe can make those quick, deep, basically cuts into the material, push cuts into the material. And part of that, though, is dependent on its edge angle. When Mr. Tsulla here made this blade, and Strider and them made this out of CPM 154 cm, I know there's some people who have good experience taking CPM to a shallow edge angle. I don't. I find that if I could have a Wharncliffe, Mr. Yannick's really lucked out by working with Spyderco and getting CPM S30V, because this edge angle is very shallow. Even though this is a formula blade, I'm going to talk about that. The more shallow it is, the more you can push cut. Now, I was showing the comparison between the performance. Now, let's say general EDC. People like the Paramilitary 2. The Paramilitary 2 can cut through cardboard, no problem, no problem. Full flat grind, hollow grind, both equal there. In terms of cutting food, I wanted to do a little showing on a scale. Maybe I'll add that in as another video. But both are just, again, razor sharp, easy to get, and both will hold a nice shallow edge. Now let's see, for example, where it gets to this concept of like push cutting into when it's pushing down, all that material is pushing straight. This knife is going to get stuck, and it's not going to just skim off and make us draw cut because it's not curved. It's going to take all the material, and all the material has to be able to basically go. This blade has to be able to go through that material. Wood kind of performance of a Paramilitary 2, right? My Paramilitary 2 has a pretty shallow edge angle. And you can see the bite's pretty deep. Here we have a shallow convex. Let's see. Okay. Shallow convex. Okay. And we're looking here at the depth, okay, of how far it's biting in. Now here is a very shallow hollow grind. The edge angle itself is not as shallow right now as what I'm about to show you on my Yojimbo, but this blade is very thin. It's only like 3 millimeters sub, and this little thing can really bite deep. I mean, if you're looking at this, look at that, 2 cuts, and look how deep it went. Because I'm gonna make this claim: the more shallow, the more razor thin, the more of an acute angle you have on your actual cutting edge, the more you're able to bite into something, or basically push cut. If you guys watched that Warren Thomas video. So here is my Yojimbo. This is a very shallow edge angle. Right now, this thing is probably at best, I don't know, less than 10 degrees on each side. But let's see, for example, how it cuts into this wood. Okay, here was the convex, here was the shallow hollow grind. Here's the Yojimbo, watch again. One cut in, right? If I work it in, I mean, just look at the ability for it to bite into something. I mean, it's insane how deeply it can cut into wood and push cut, basically. You see? So in terms of woodwork, this is a good woodworking knife. Definitely not for impacts, but general carving, those kind of tasks, because it is S30V and it will be able to hold a razor edge and hold a shallow razor edge. You know, people will say, like, as you cut something, you know, they want a belly because they draw the belly, of course, if this is a flat surface you're cutting into, of course, you're going to want to have that belly, I guess, to kind of rock it in and get it in that material cutting, right? At which point then, the material is usually behind the blade, and you draw a cut, and it drags the material into that blade. Basically the same thing as what a recurve would do, a karambit, hawkbill shape would do, and it's the exact same thing as what this would do, except when you have a Wharncliffe, either you're going to have to cut this direction first to break through the material, or you're going to have to pierce with the tip. But once you're past that, at this blade size, it's the same aspect, the same idea. You just drag it across. You're going to be using your tip more than a normal knife, but it's the same thing. I mean, you see all these tests, the belly is what is what wears, and it has rolls and chips, etc. On the Wharncliffe, you're going to be using the tip to drag it and pull it across. Using it is just the same. Totally functional. If anyone has any worries or concerns about using this blade shape, it's the same idea. If you pull the paramilitary, the material gets caught underneath this curve up, and then it starts to get pulled across that blade. Same thing, gets pulled into that blade. It's just a straight edge rather instead of a curve. One of the limitations to this, though, is because there is a actual flat, it's a saber hollow. This edge angle, you can see here, there are some scrapes because of this edge angle, the angle that basically I've set it at now. When I was sharpening it and trying to lower the edge angle, it hits a point where you can't go further, basically because there's this flat portion, and that edge angle is about what you see here. Perhaps an overall of like I know you guys look. Definitely, it's a shallow edge angle. Don't want to drop it, don't want to do no impact cutting. It allows it to have a lot of performance. And now why it needs to have a shallow edge is then it goes back to that idea of when you cut into the material, you need to know that it's going to basically snag all that material and then just push straight through it. And so you need to know it can basically push cut deep into something easily, so it needs a shallow edge angle. Basically, I'm trying to say that a Wharncliffe is great, better than basically a curved blade, but only better if it is able to have a very shallow edge angle. And basically whatever you hit, if it's 1 inch in, 2 inches in, all that material you're cutting through will be push cut through, and it'll all snag and stay on this blade. And it's very deadly and very cool, and I guess you could say functional. It's very effective. But like I said, the limitation is depending on what you're cutting, impact cutting, you're going to need a stronger edge. At that point, perhaps you're going to lose the ability to push cut. It's going to bind more materials. The knife gets bigger and bigger. You might want a blade that curves, and at the same time, if you're going to do impact cutting, you want a more, if you want an edge angle that's more high, you're going to need a curved blade because it's not going to push cut. It's going to need to actually hit the material and then slide off of it and actually draw cut and cut into it. And again, the thickness at this 4mm mark and this size, just like on Tazula, it's a great combination, especially with S30V. It's a very, very effective and deadly combination. Mr. Yannick's has this design also available as a what's it called? A Be Warned by Blackhawk. It's the exact same design except Blackhawk construction. Now I would say that it is very. If I was Mr. Yannick's, I would feel very lucky to have that Spyderco paramilitary construction. Is just awesome because the Spyderco paramilitary is great. So basically any flaws you see with this paramilitary, basically you're looking at the exact same lock, compression lock, same durability, so that's a great lock. It's not wear resistant under heavy use. You go hard on it, you're going to deform that liner that's being compressed. It's going to basically squish and deform and bend. But under normal tactical use, EDC use, you can go positive pressure, cut on things, and it'll be fine because there's no actual pressure on the lock bar when you're doing that. It's only on the stop pin. But then of course there's that pivot, which then allows some slight movement, and it just allows slight movement because the pivot's just a little bit too wide, and when you tighten down these screws all the way, there's still some space on the sides of the blade that allows some slight side to side. A lot of paramilitaries, practically everyone's has it. So does the Yojimbo. It has some side to side. The main concept here is you don't need Loctite. You just, because of that spacer, it's like a Sabenza, just not machined as tightly. You can tighten down the screws all the way, and you never need Loctite, and the blade still can move and swing open freely. It does have a somewhat sort of safety, kind of bites you, but it's okay. And so long, yeah, and if there is an increase in bulk, of course your hand's not going to slide up, because as you grip harder, as you go up the blade, it gets more wide. Of course, you're going to have a constant, continuous resistance to your hand sliding up. Here is a little bit more to fill your palm, a couple choils. The deployment is hard when you do tip up and you pull it out. Because of this taper down, I think you would have done better to have it come back up a little bit, so that you could grab something more solid, an actual area to pull out, and to grab easily. This time, with the way it's designed, you kind of have to rely on the clip, you have to rely on this G10, but if your hands are wet, Spyderco G10 is not that grippy, so it starts to become problematic. And I wish it did have that perhaps small refinement in the handle, or some jimping, or somewhere around here, or even on this blade spine. I wouldn't care. It wouldn't affect any kind of piercing, because as you pierce, you're going to be piercing, and the material is going to be cutting and relieving itself. The pressure is going to be relieving up, so nothing's really going to be touching that. So I would like it to have something like that. A weird thing, and perhaps a limit to the design, is the compression lock. It is harder to get to. One of the reasons, for example, is because you can see this part of the blade folds in and then basically sits flush with that straight cutout. So I guess they couldn't. I mean, they could have done this, which is much more easy to operate. This is basically what you see here is, okay, if you go and you dig your finger in, it's fine. But if you go and you push down with your thumb, this one you are actually pushing with your thumb against the lock, like actually on the flat portion. Unfortunately, with the Yojimbo, when you push down on it like that, you're actually pushing on the top part, and it does hurt and kind of bite into your finger, and it's not as comfortable. So it's almost like you're more meant to have to close it like this. Now, one of the reasons I was thinking, perhaps beyond the fact that it's, the actual way that the whole blade is shaped and designed, because that could be modified. He could have just tapered this up, okay, is that perhaps, being that it's a fighting knife or a tactical knife, Mr. Yojimbo didn't want it to be easily accessible. He wanted that to be sort of protected and guarded from any accidental disengaging. Because if you do hold it in complete grip, your finger is resting right there. I guess it is possible, perhaps, maybe, that someone would accidentally, push down on it, especially with this more large cutout. Because if it is like in complete grip, you see, my finger is resting. Perhaps he was concerned about that. Maybe I think it was just to keep it away from everything, beyond the fact of the design. But that design could be modified and tweaked, and I think perhaps some of these things could be shifted around to keep it away from this area and make it just a little more easy to operate. But that's what it is. You get used to it. Ultimately, in the end, the compression lock is still a compression lock. You just have to close it more like that way. For left people, it's a little bit more annoying, but still doable. Like I said, it's just a little bit more annoying. It takes a little more conscious effort. It's just not like a pair of two where you don't even notice it. You're just like, use it, close it, no big deal. How you close it, definitely a pair of two kind of wins on that ease of use. But like I said, being a tactical knife, perhaps this is a smarter choice. This is stupid. It's just stupid. Why is that there? I mean, what it makes you have to do is either hold it like this or hold it like this. But if you flick it out, you get out of your pocket and you put your hand here, and then you're hitting on this goofy little hot spot, and it's just like you have to consciously put an effort. And it takes some time to kind of basically get used to it. The jimping is useless. I mean, it's just kind of like, why do that? It doesn't really need to be there. I mean, your thumb is not going to secure the knife. It's this choil and all this other ergonomics, and besides, complete grip would be like that anyway. So it's not totally necessary. I think it's a little too extreme. Perhaps just a design, personal preference. No jimping on the spine. That's a smart idea, because as I've been using it in some of the wood cutting, yeah, you don't want, like for example on some of those Graymans, they have that really hard cut jimping. You don't want that. Hard cut jimping really does hurt your fingers unless you're wearing gloves. It's just not necessary. One thing I do wish they would do for the ergonomics of this that they would add a bevel, like a Chris Reeve style rounded off blade spine. That would be beautiful, because when you do grab it, you have two options: non-lethal self-defense, which is great. This is why I like folders. You pull it out of your pocket and you have this concept of hitting right here, okay? Have I tried that? Yeah. You can hit right here, no big deal. But it starts to get a little bit nerve-wracking because you have these sharp corners. Now I've kind of gone and sanded them down, smooth them out a little bit. They don't come razor sharp like a Taiwan-made Spyderco without the extra fit and finish. This is American-made, Colorado-made, so it does have a smoothed-out spiral hole and a smoothed-off spine corners. But it is sharp enough to where basically if you grip it really hard, hit it down, and it moves in your hand, you could possibly cut into your fingers. I don't like that. I would like it to be smooth. The ergonomics, though, do help the idea of hitting it here. there's not much to really work with. Most of the time for me, and you can see this on a chisel knife, and you'll see this on other knives too. When you pull it out, for example, you see, you're holding it like this. You hit with here. I mean, this is what it's a striking point. You can jab it in someone, you can basically whack someone with it. And then if you need to deploy it, you're not in an odd position. This knife, of course, if it is tipped down, you pull it out. You have to go like this, resituate it, hit with there. If it's tipped up, you can pull it out and hit with that point, which is kind of nice. And I would say that at that point, like I said, is a little more effective in my opinion than using this bomb part. But personal preference. I mean, if you like the hammer fist, I would rather try to have a little bit extra reach or jab someone with it. But it does have some workability. The knife does seem to me to be made for like smaller people, smaller hands, and that gets into the deployment. Now, where a lot of people will say the fault of the Yojimbo is compared to the paramilitary is the paramilitary has a larger spider hole, and it does. In that case, it wins. I mean, it is much more fluid to just access that spider hole. I mean, it's uncovered, it's all there. Gloves or no gloves, easy. Now, why Mr. Yannick decided to do that? Okay, this I honestly think was what his thought was on this thing, is that he wanted to preserve some spine strength. That I feel was completely irrelevant and useless because you're not, you're not going to be prying with a tactical Warncliffe. I mean, it's a Warncliffe. You don't pry with that tip, so you don't really need that strength there. I mean, if this is a tactical knife, it's fine enough. I mean, it's good enough. I think he should have increased the spider hole size. Absolutely, at least that way. Made the hole specifically more available to reach. I mean, it's ambidextrous, but there's a cutout on both sides to reach it. But what a lot of people perhaps will complain about more is its position here rather than over here. Here's this large open spot. If it was here, what you're going to first notice when you have the Yojimbo is you're going to put your finger there, and it comes very early to the spiral hole. Like you're forced to almost like jam your finger in. Like if you have a big hand, you're going to be like, this is annoying. You're going to pull it out. And that's where I'm thinking, after I've used it more, giving Mr. Yannick the benefit of doubt, and his thought into this perhaps was he wanted the hole to be very close to obviously the bottom of the handle, so that when you pull it out, when it's tip up, regardless of general hand size, I guess, if you do practice this, and I noticed on this knife, if you follow your hand up, you will then reach that hole sooner than perhaps the possibility of some people who've pulled out the paramilitary and had it like this and not been near that hole. So in that sense, paramilitary is easier to deploy because of that finger hole, but this one perhaps that edge right there is so this way because he wanted you to pull it out and be able to quickly access it and do that. So better or worse, it's okay. I mean, it'd be nice if it was a little more wide, like in terms of he situated the hole more towards the actual spine and kind of just gave up that idea of having thickness here, so that you could at least access it more this way. But generally speaking, you do slide your finger up, push it up, and get used to it. So some people will say that the paramilitary wins on deployment in terms of a tactical knife. Now, paramilitary, we know we can zip tie and wave. This one I'm going to have to annotate in because I haven't tried it. But I mean, I'm assuming you possibly could wave it. Like I said, the problem more is just the grip. Tip down, I find it's horrible because you depending on your pockets. If you have like old-fashioned jeans that sit like this, yeah, you pull it out, from the side, you grab it like that, and you're good to go. But if you have any kind of cargo shorts, anything, the pocket's cut like this. It sits in your knife sits in your pocket kind of like this. It's hard to grab it underneath like that, and most of the time you end up pulling it out like this and having to rotate your hand. Is it doable? Yeah, but in the end I still chose for tip up. Flicking it this way will take some time to break it in. The compression lock seems to be a little more stronger. The deten's very strong, and I think Sparko did that because of the blade weight, because there's more material on the blade. Benefit to that is though, then now this knife can be shaken out. Is it easy? No. I mean, it takes some real hard shaking. It's not down and up. It's almost like a forward and out to do it. But it can be done. So in that sense, the paramilitary cannot do that. It doesn't have enough weight. So in terms of tactical deployment, if both possibly can be waved, which I'll annotate in, yes, this one's easier to access, okay? But again, that's a fine motor skill. If you go back and watch those videos, getting your finger to a spot to then operate basically a piece of machinery is not as simple as a gross motor skill as in just holding a bulk and shaking it. I mean, it's a gross motor, a large motion that doesn't require any finesse, any fine motor skills or control. Whether your hands be cold, whether you're not being paying attention, if you miss the spider hole, this intense in a sense than the waving. It's kind of pros and cons. What do you prefer better? For me, I like to be able to shake, and so far as I get used to this and I just practice that, it does take some practice and get used to. It's easy enough to do that. Overall, though, if I had to choose between these two knives right here, the Paramilitary 2 or the Yojimbo, you guys know the Paramilitary 2 is a great knife. It's one of the knives that I always constantly recommend of a lot of the Spydercos. But do I like the Yojimbo more? Yes, I like the Yojimbo more than the Paramilitary 2, hands down, because I like this blade shape. I find more function, more performance out of it. I did want to mention that with this full flat grind, though, you're able to take that edge even higher of a shallow edge angle, basically a more acute edge angle than you can on this because there's no flat portion. But you guys saw the cutting performance. It's pretty darn good enough. It doesn't really need to be more shallow than that. The blade shape, you can shave with it because it has a straight edge. You can, in terms of tip slashing and that push cutting performance, the hollow grind buying into wood is very functional. Snagging that flesh with that that straight edge rather than letting it skim off, it's more effective tactically, and it does have a very secure grip. That's one thing too. This knife is very secure in your hand, the overall shape. The wide portion prevents a lot of rotating forces. You have a large portion here for your thumb to do work. It is originally I thought that this was more of a utility knife, zero tactical compared to the Paramilitary, but as you use it more, there are some flaws. They could fix that, like I said. Perhaps mainly just that, to guarantee when you pull it out, you can get it out when it's tip up. But beyond that, the knife is overall a great knife. Like I said, similar construction to Paramilitary 2. I mean, everything is basically identical construction. Same thing, holes being tapped, to four-way clip. Pivot. All that good stuff. It's this compression lock. It's just as strong as Paramilitary 2. So for me, though, what makes it win is the blade shape. I'm gonna agree with Yannick's and Terzula here. The blade, with its large kind of area, allows for easy holding and manipulating of the actual blade itself. It's nice also when in the kitchen too, because when you cut, because of the hollow grind, the things you're cutting through, for example, cheese, when you're cutting down that slice of cheese, because it's not a consistent flat surface like a full flat grind that just keeps touching that, and the cheese just keeps rubbing up on it, this hollow grind separates at first, so it's easier to go through. There's much less pressure, which is why I bought that scale to later show. So it's easier to cut through materials that don't want to separate. Last thing, of course, since it doesn't have a belly, you're not going to be able to do any scooping motions. Skinning, for example, is going to be much more challenging. You're not going to be able to basically dig with the knife. You're going to have to, insert the tip kind of vibe. But beyond those, then, if your daily tasks don't involve the use of a belly in terms of scooping, everything else you're capable of doing with this knife.